Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to have you here on this chilly evening in February. I'm delighted to join you, and particularly delighted that we have these joint sessions together where we partner with other chapters. So it's such a delight to always work with Dr. White and bringing this to both of our chapters. So I'm going to leave the introductions up to Dr. White and Sood for later on. I did just want to jump on very quickly. Dr. Deepak had asked me to say a word or two at the very beginning about some concerns that are related particularly to international medical graduates. And I really just mostly wanted to jump on to reassure anyone who wasn't aware of the efforts of the ACP that the ACP is on it. We have a really, really active legislative arm that has headquarters in DC. They're really paying, despite the volume of executive orders, they keep on top of them. So they are well aware of the issues with the executive orders that President Trump issued in September, restricting non-immigrant workers and imposing this $100,000 fee on employers for each H-1B application and changing the processing of applying for J-1 visas. They have submitted multiple letters to the Department of Homeland Security, and I can drop copies of those letters in the chat for anyone who hasn't seen them, asking that physicians, medical students, fellows, trainees should be exempt from these H-1B fees and the J-1 visa policy changes. So I'll send you that information. If you're not already signed up as an advocacy in internal medicine, I strongly encourage you to go to the ACP website. Again, I'll put the link to this in the chat and sign up to be an advocate. It is so easy. It is the easiest way for all of us to be really actively in control of legislation that's impacting our lives and the lives of our patients. So when you sign up for advocacy in internal medicine, you get these alerts that say, hey, we need y'all to write to your congressman about such and such issue. Here's a form letter, customize it, put in a story that's important to you. Hit click send, it'll send it to the right people for you. You don't have to go to the government and look up addresses, and it could not be easier. So ACP is on it. We're aware of many of these challenges that make it very, very difficult. It's always been difficult to be an international medical graduate in our country. It's gotten even harder in this current climate, and we're pushing hard back against that. So thank you all for allowing me to say a few words about that. And I'll turn things over to Dr. White.
Great. Thank you so much. I really do encourage you as well to join the AIM network. That's what she's talking about. Advocates in Internal Medicine is called the AIM network. Well, I want to say thank you also and welcome everybody. But I particularly want to thank Dr. Kumar, who I'm about to turn this over to introduce the speaker, for really organizing our committee in DC for international medical graduates and for organizing this evening session. So thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. I'll turn it over to you to introduce Dr. Cotton, who we're thrilled is here tonight.
Thank you, Dr. White, for the kind words, and thank you for the opportunity. Welcome, everyone. Wonderful evening, despite the aftermath of the snow and the traffic here in DC. Glad everyone was able to join. And I am absolutely delighted to have Dr. Cotton here with us. So Dr. Cotton received his medical degree from the Pennsylvania State University, did his residency training in internal medicine at the Johns Hopkins Hospital, and received his law degree from the Widener University. Dr. Cotton has practiced and taught both law and medicine, spending 8 years as an internist and the past 20 years as a healthcare attorney. Dr. Cotton is an experienced speaker, educator, and has received Professor of the Year awards at both the medical and the law schools where he has taught. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, Dr. Cotton. And I'll hand over the stage to you.
Well, thank you for the very nice introduction, Dr. Kumar. Let me share my slides here. There we go. I think they come up. Let's go to full screen. So as mentioned in my bio, I've practiced medicine. I've spent the past 2 decades practicing law. All of my clients are physicians. I help physicians with various medical legal situations. A lot of it is jobs, searching for jobs, changing jobs, trying to get out of an unsatisfactory job. What I want to talk about here this evening is making the most of your employment contract with a particular angle towards international medical graduates and folks who are not yet U.S. citizens. I've got 3 parts to my presentation. Some general observations about just looking for a job or changing jobs. I want to talk about some negotiating principles to help you make the most of what's out there. And then we'll talk about some of the specific things that you need to know before you put pen to paper on any contract. And the process I'm going to talk about this evening is the same, regardless of your visa or citizenship status. This is very important because I talked to a lot of folks who are not U.S. citizens, international medical grads who came here for their training and now they're looking for a job. And there's a lot of folks who are a little timid. They think, well, I really can't ask for much. I really need to be, accept whatever someone offers. And I would submit to you that I think it's just the opposite. It is true that you typically have less options out there. If you're looking for an employer to sponsor a J1 waiver or an H1B or an O1, you typically will have less. The total number of potential jobs is lower. That is true because many employers will not do any immigration sponsorship or work. But once you narrow it down to the employers who will do that, I would submit to you, you often have much more leverage than perhaps an American citizen who's looking for a job in another area. And the reason is most folks that are sponsoring visas and waivers, they're doing that because they're having difficulty attracting physicians and recruiting physicians. So because they've had difficulty attracting and recruiting and retaining, you often have much more leverage than you would if you were going to a job in a very affluent and nice, desirable location. The second thing that I've noticed physicians will do in your situation is they'll think, well, I'm probably going to have to take less money than I otherwise would. And that's also incorrect. Immigration law prevents employers from paying non-citizens less than they would pay citizens for the same job. So it's actually illegal for them to pay you less or offer you less than they would an American citizen. So my first point here is that everything I'm going to say applies to you. You have far more leverage and negotiating power than you realize. And please don't approach this with the idea that you should just take whatever someone offers because, hey, you're in a desperate situation. Don't sell yourself short before the process even begins. With that said, let's talk about the big picture of a job search. The first thing is the job has to be personally and professionally satisfying, or it's not going to last very long. You're not going to be happy. And frankly, the contract doesn't really matter because the contract is not going to make you happy. I always encourage folks to start with the job they like the most, because ultimately that's what you have to do every day. You might have a great contract, but if it's associated with a terrible job, you're going to be miserable, and that is not going to last. And this is especially important if you're on a J1 waiver or something where you're locked in for 3 or more years. So always start with the job you like the most and then try to maximize that opportunity. I run into too many physicians who they've looked at 5 jobs, they're trying to negotiate all of them at the same time, and it's just a mess because you can't keep track of anything. Pick the job you like the most and focus on that one. Maximize it. And if you're happy, sign the contract. If you're not happy, go to your second choice and try to maximize that opportunity. Don't sell yourself short. Don't sign something just because someone put it in front of you. There's always something that can be improved, even on the most rigid contracts. They may not negotiate the pay. Fine. Negotiate the call schedule, negotiate your clinic schedule, negotiate where you do your outreach. What clinics do I cover? Negotiate research time, negotiate something. Even the most rigid contracts can be negotiated in some aspect. It also tells you how people really are. When you interview, everybody's nice. I'm okay, you're okay. We're all great people. This is going to be great. That's a first date. A job is like any relationship. We're going to have to go through and solve problems together. Asking people if they're open to changing or improving or modifying some parts of the contract gives you some insight into how they approach problem solving. Are they responsive? Are they receptive? Are they accommodating? They don't have to give you everything, but they need to at least hear you and understand your perspective. That is vital to the success of the relationship. Fortunately, most people are that way in this business, but sometimes you run into folks that are rigid, almost to the point of being harsh. You ask for something entirely reasonable, and their response can be a little off-putting. It's unnecessarily blunt and harsh. That's not the best sign for the relationship, because if that's how they're behaving in the recruiting, the courting phase, you have to be a little concerned about what's going to happen when there's a problem in clinic 6 months into the job and you have to go back to this person looking for some understanding. It may not be there. This isn't a deal breaker, but it's important. I have found that good people are more important than a good contract, because good people will make things right. Challenging people are going to make things challenging regardless of the contract. That's the first part of the talk. What's the moral of the story of the first part of the talk? Find a job you like the most and try to make the most of that opportunity. Negotiating principles. Most physicians hate negotiation. If I said, well, how do you like to negotiate? Most people say, no, I hate it. It's confrontational, it's difficult, it's stressful. You're just tearing away at the person, they're tearing away at you. I can't stand it. Well, if that's the way you're doing it, I couldn't stand it either. Who would like to do so? Who would possibly like a relationship that an interaction where you're tearing each other apart? That's not at all enjoyable. If that's how you're doing it wrong. You need to back up. You need to relieve the stress. We're trying to build a relationship here. We're not, this isn't a one-time slug it out transaction. This is the front end of hopefully an enduring relationship. So don't make it confrontational and adversarial. A good negotiator, here's a little thing to remember. A good negotiator weaves the negotiation into the interaction in such a way that the other person doesn't really perceive it as negotiation. It's more conversational and pleasant. The more you make it that way, and the less you make it adversarial, the more successful you're going to be. Why? Because people are more willing to do things if they like you. They think, well, this person, they're a great fit. I really like his or her style. If you get them to like you, and this is true anywhere in life, if people like you, they're going to do more for you. If you make it stressful and difficult and challenge them and hammer away at them, they might wear out on that and say, you got a great CV, but I just don't know if I can work with you. Okay. That's not where we want to go with this. A good negotiator makes it easy. So that sounds fantastic. How do I do that? Well, I'm glad you asked. The first thing you do before you change jobs, interview, get on a Zoom call, get on a phone call with a potential employer, is you have to know what you want. Too many people enter into this without really knowing what they want. And how can you negotiate if you don't know what's important to you? Let's suppose that you really like a research time. So your goal is you love research, you want research time. Okay, we'll assume that's your only real priorities. You just want a bunch of research time. Okay, you need to know how much you want. So you say, well, if I could get 2 days a week for research, I'd be really happy. Okay, you're ready to interview. You're on the interview. You're walking through the facility, the campus. They show you the clinic, the ED, the OR. And then they're like, well, this is our research building. And they take you in there. It's time to negotiate. It's time to, you say, well, I'm just interviewing. No. A good negotiator is always ready. You're in the research building. You want to do research. It's time to negotiate. What better time? What better place? You say, well, that's kind of awkward. What do I say? Conversational. You make it easy. You say something like, I really like research. Do you envision I could have some research time? The person might say, well, yeah, we could probably, maybe that's a possibility. Develop the conversation, make it friendly. You'd say, well, I really like it. I mean, how much time do you think I could have? Well, the person might say, well, I don't know. How much were you looking for? Okay, it's conversation. It's easy. They just asked you the question you want to answer. So you are now going to say, I tell you what, if you could give me 2 days of research, I'd be absolutely thrilled to death about this opportunity. It's so easy. How did you do it? You were ready. You waited for the opportunity to pass before you. You made it friendly. You asked some questions. You developed the conversation. You got them to ask you the question, and you were ready to give the answer. If you're really good, you'll know what they need. Let's suppose you realized in the course of your travels and talking to folks, they really need someone to cover a clinic that's 10 miles away. You got to go there once or twice a week. Nobody wants to go there. They're just hoping somebody is silly enough to agree to go there, because no one wants to go there. So let's back it up. You're saying, well, if you give me 2 days of research, I'd be super, super excited. The person might say, well, yeah, that's a little more than we normally give. I mean, I don't know if I could do that. You're ready now. So you're meeting a little resistance. When a good negotiator meets resistance, they don't try to run the person over. They give something. That's how you overcome resistance. You give something. So when the person says, I don't really know if we can do, 2 days, I don't know about that. You're going to say, hey, I tell you what, I heard there's a clinic location down the road that nobody, it's kind of tough to find people willing to go there. I tell you what, if you could give me some research time, I'd be willing to do, I'll cover that clinic for you. Now you've changed the dynamic. Now you're giving. Now, if you said that to me, I'd be like, oh, really? You do that? Are you serious? I tell you what, if you can do, let me see what I can do about the research. I think I'd like to try to make this work. Now, I'm not promising it always goes that way, but that gives you the best, medicine. We have an approach to the patient. It doesn't always result in a great outcome, but it is the best approach to the patient. That's what we're doing here. What's the best approach to negotiating? You start by being pleasant and friendly and non-confrontational. You develop the conversation. You put your request out there in a friendly manner. And when you meet resistance, you give. You give when you meet resistance. You're here to try to accommodate and draw the person towards you. This is contrary to what most of us are told. They're like, you got to be hard-nosed, you got to push, you got to beat the table, you got to let them know you're prepared to walk out, you got to say, this is a deal breaker, and I'm not putting up with it, and I got better offers, I'll walk right now. That's not how you form a relationship, okay? That is not, if you're doing that, you're not going to be nearly as effective, okay? I want you to draw the other person towards you. You're always drawing them towards you. So let's suppose you'd like more money. So they gave you an offer, it's a little low, you want more money. What most of us do is we just wait for a quiet moment in the conversation, or we get out our laptop and we type an email and we just go right at the issue. We say something like, hey, I was looking at the offer, it seems a little low, can you raise the salary $50,000? And you hit send. That might work, but that's not very good, okay? The problem with that approach is, if you hit me with that request, even if I'm willing to give you that much money, I don't know what it's going to get me. And nobody wants to negotiate into a void. You see, if I say, yeah, I can give you a raise, and I hit send, what are you going to say? I don't know. You might say, let me think about it. Yeah, that's great. I just spent $50,000 and I got nothing. You might say, I got 4 or 5 other things. I'll get them back to you tomorrow. Well, that's great too. I just spent $50,000 and you got more stuff you want? Or you might say, I got some other interviews. Let me come on. Where are you? I don't want to spend money unless I know I'm getting something. No one wants to just pour into a relationship. We all know that. Bad relationships are ones that you pour yourself into and the other person does nothing. Don't be that type of negotiator. What's a better way to ask for money? Better way to ask for anything? We'll draw the person towards you. Compliment them. You would say something like, hey, thanks for the interview. I think you got a great thing going there. You got a great team. I'd really love to be part of it. I looked at the contract. I'm very happy. I just have a couple questions about the compensation. If we can work them out, I'm going to sign. That's so much easier. You told me you like me. You told me I got a great team. You told me you want to be here. You said, we just got to work out some compensation and you're going to sign it. I'm going to be like, well, what's your question? Let's work it out. You've drawn me towards you. Okay. Physicians are reluctant to do that. They'll say things like, well, if I start telling them how much I like the job and that I really want to be there, I feel like I'm showing my cards. I don't want to give away my position. Okay, this is not a card game. Okay, we're not bluffing here. We're forming a relationship. And in terms of your position, I'll give away your position. Your position is you're looking for a job. Okay, that's not a mystery. Okay, again, people like it when you're forthcoming and you're honest and you're not hiding anything. That's the type of people we all want to work with. Show people that's who you are. You're going to be far more effective. Okay, always think about drawing the other. If you meet resistance, give them something to reestablish the rapport, and then continue your pursuit. Don't compare offers in front of the other person. As scientists, we just want to do this. You just want to create a graph or a spreadsheet and come up with a p-value and sit down and show the other person how terrible their offer is to a p-value of less than 0.001. This just blows up relationships, because the only reason you're going to show me other offers are because they're higher than my offer. And now, instead of building a relationship and establishing rapport and befriending me, you're saying you don't measure up, Cotton. Your offer stinks. I don't know how you could offer. That's what I'm hearing. And I don't like that. You have to be careful with direct comparisons, telling people they don't measure up. You can do this, but you have to be gentle. You have to be softer. You have to say things like, hey, I know every job is different and there's a lot more than just the salary, but the offer is a little lower than some of my other offers. And I'm wondering if we can talk about that. You got to be soft, okay? Because you just come in and tell me I don't measure up. I'm not going to take that well. And you're pushing me away from the table. A good negotiator never gives a range. A good negotiator gives a number. When you decided how many days of research you wanted, the correct answer was 2. You want 2 days. You give a number. A good negotiator gives a number. If you want a raise, you want $50,000. Inexperienced negotiators give ranges. It is very, very common. And you're going to be ready. If someone gives you a range, you're not going to do this. But if someone gives you a range, you need to know how to respond. So let's suppose you're a cardiologist and you're on an interview and they say, hey, in case you were wondering, we usually start people at 450 to 500. Now, they've given a range. This person is not an experienced negotiator, but you are. You're going to politely respond by repeating back the end of the range that's most favorable to you. In this case, you would say $500,000. Thank you for sharing that. It gives me something to think about. That's what you're going to say. Now, you didn't agree to it, but they said it and you said it. Where else could we be? Now, you're probably thinking, well, maybe as a lawyer, you could do that stuff, but I don't know. I kind of think you're sort of taking advantage of the other person, and it seems a little slippery to me. I don't want to do it. Okay, let me ask the question a different way. They're going to interview you and 5 other people for this job. Where do you rank out of those 6 people? Are you the best? Yes. Are you the person they should hire? Yes. Are you confident in your abilities? Yes. If you're the best person and you're the best trained and you know that they should hire you above everybody else, you are absolutely worth the top end of the range and probably more. It's not a sign of greed or lawyerly slipperiness. It's a sign of confidence in your abilities. The problem in medicine is we've been conditioned in altruism and self-sacrifice for so long that we believe this is the place to show altruism, because we're not greedy. Now, I've thought about this because I was trained in the same system. I know what, and it's a wonderful system. But here's the best way to view it. If there's a patient in the room, you should be altruistic. if there's no patient in the room, you have to look out for yourself. And this is one of those times where you're tempted to be altruistic. And many of you would say something like, instead of saying 500, thank you for sharing that, you would say, well, I was hoping for more than 450. Okay, that's what you say. And then the person might say, well, we could do like 460, would that work? You're like, yeah, I could do that. Thank you. And you'd go home and say, I think I did pretty good. No, you did terribly, horribly. You had 500, you threw it back, it came home with 460. That's a bad negotiating, okay? But it arises because you don't want to seem greedy. It's not greed, it's confidence in your abilities. If you're the best person, why would you not be worth the top end of the range, okay? So have confidence out there. Don't expect everything. That's not reasonable. A good negotiator is always willing to leave something on the table. If you know your priorities and you know research is what you really want, and you get your 2 days of research, you may have to give up a lot of the other things you sort of wanted. But if you get the things you really want, maybe you get number 1 and number 3, or number 2 and number 3. You don't have to worry about number 6 and number 7. They're just not as important. And a good negotiator always compromises. What are the things? So that's the first 2 parts of the talk. Find the job you like the most and improve it as much as you can. Can every job be improved? Yeah, somewhere. As I said, sometimes it's like at the margins, maybe clinic days, clinic locations, call schedule. Sometimes it's not big ticket things like a bigger salary. Sometimes the salary is not negotiable. But you got to try, and you got to see where you can tweak it so that you maximize the opportunity. What things do you need to know before you sign a contract? I broke them into 2 categories. The terms of arrival, these are the things you get when you show up. And everybody focuses on that. Another equally important part of the contract is called terms of departure. And these terms control how and when you can leave a contract. Single biggest mistake physicians make with contracts, by far, they know the terms of arrival. They know nothing about the terms of departure. The job turns out to not be a fit. And all of a sudden, they realize they can't get out of the contract very easily. That's a horrible place to be, trapped in a bad job with a contract you can't get out of. Be sure you know the terms of departure before you sign any contract, especially one of these contracts. The terms of arrival include a number of things, work requirements. This should be in the contract to some degree. Now, we're not going to put a Monday to Friday schedule in a contract. That's silly because schedules change. But if you negotiated 2 days of research, or you negotiated a call not more than twice a month, if you've negotiated things that are really important to you, then they have to be in writing somewhere, ideally in the contract. Because otherwise, you took a job agreeing to go to that bad clinic location in return for 2 days of research, but you have nothing in writing. You show up 10 months later, maybe the person you talked to is not there anymore. You got nothing in writing. And they're like, oh, yeah, you said you go to that bad clinic, right? And you're like, well, yeah, I did say that, but what about the research? And they're like, well, I don't know about the research, but, have fun at that bad clinic. What a horrible outcome. So if something is absolutely the key to the job and you negotiated it, you need something in writing. The rest of the week-to-week schedule doesn't matter as much. But make sure the things that are really critical, you get them somewhere in that document in writing. Money. I've been talking for 20 minutes. I finally get to money. Why? Because it's not the most important thing. You got to find people and a job you like, and you got to map out the things that are going to make you happy. And now we get to money. Here's the way money works. If you go to any city in America and you look at initial salaries, the non-university health systems like the MedStars in the Baltimore area, they're typically going to pay the most. The private practices will be in the middle, and then the academic institutions will be at the lower end of the scale. The delta here is 15 to 20%. So if the non-university health system's paying $400, the private practice might pay $330, and academics might pay $275. And those numbers will translate to every market. There's a delta of maybe 15 to 20%. Now, if you join the right private practice and you become a partner, maybe eventually you pass up everybody. But these are starting numbers, true in every specialty. Where you go also has a dramatic effect. If you get into the Midwest, which is really anything west of Pittsburgh, almost all the way to Denver, that's the highest paying area of the country. If you get into corridors where everybody wants to be, like California, especially the coast, the I-95 corridor from DC up to through New York to Boston, and then Southeast Florida, these are the lowest paying areas of the country. There's too many doctors, too many hospitals, too many HMOs, too much competition. You get into isolated areas of the Midwest, there's just no competition, and you have a bit of a monopoly there as a healthcare provider. And monopolies are great if you own a monopoly. They're not so good if you're against a monopoly. The dynamic here, the differences are dramatic. If you went to work for a non-academic health system in the upper Midwest, and you compare that to a academic position in Boston, the salary, the starting salaries can be threefold difference, threefold, not just $3,000. If one of those offers is 200, the other one could be 600. That's very common, dramatic differences. You need to factor that into your expectations if you're changing jobs. If you absolutely have to be in DC for whatever reason, you're going to take a hit compared to your colleague who's going to Ohio. And that's just the reality. This paradox is the places that pay the least have the highest cost of living, and the places that pay the most have the lowest cost of living. But again, you say, well, how can they pay so little in Boston? Because people are lined up to take the job, so they don't have to pay anymore. And when no one lines up anymore, then they're going to have to raise the pay. It's supply and demand. Money can take various forms. We all focus on salary. That's the biggest number in the contract. When you take a job, the salary should be guaranteed for some period of time, typically 1 to 3 years. If it's an established practice with a lot of volume, probably 1 year is enough. If you're starting a new location, they want you to be the corner person at this new campus or new outpatient center. You probably need a couple year guarantee to get the ramp up going, because most places are ultimately going to switch you off a guarantee and onto productivity, which means your pay is going to be driven by your clinical volume, procedures, and patient visits. Now, the length of the guarantee, as I said, depends on the situation. If 3 people retired and they desperately need you, 1 year is probably enough. You'll ramp up quite quickly. But in other situations, you might need a 2 or 3 year ramp up. Think about that as you're looking at the job, like, how fast can I ramp up? And do they want to switch me to productivity? Academic institutions typically don't. Kaiser does not switch to productivity. Some places do keep a salary indefinitely, but even in those situations, that salary does have an underpinning of productivity supporting it. Ultimately, everybody's salary is directly or indirectly productivity linked. Once they switch you to productivity, there's 2 models out there. There's an RVU-based model, which is commonly used by health systems. You take your number of RVUs times the dollar amount, and that's how much you make. So when you're evaluating a job, questions to ask would be, of the internists or the hospitalists or the gastroenterologists that are here now, about how many RVUs are they generating? The next question, and that's a good question to ask. And there's national medians out there to see, is that high or low? How hard are they working? How efficient is the system? And that's ultimately multiplied by a dollar value, commonly called a conversion factor. And that's how much you make. These are important questions to ask because, hey, they pay you $300,000 a year for 1 year. Okay, then what happens? If you're going to be there for 10 years, that second question is very important. You should ask, well, if they're doing 5,000 RVUs and they pay $100 an RVU, then they're making about 500,000. That's about what you'll make. And that's very important in your decision. So don't be afraid to ask these questions. And people should be very willing to share the answers. If you join a private practice, they're a small business. They don't use RVUs. They just take revenue minus expenses, and that's how much you make. So again, you want to ask about what is the average revenue for one of the gastroenterologists in this practice. Expense percentage ratio is very important. This number should be in the 50% range or less. Some practices out there are running like 58 or 62% expense margins. That's unsustainable. You can't sustain any business that's being eaten alive by its overhead. Anybody that's at 60% overhead is in deep trouble. You want to have second thoughts about taking that job. That's salary. Now, that's the number we focus on, but a good negotiator is creative. So you say, hey, you got any room on a salary? I'd really like it to be a little higher. And they're like, no, I'm sorry, we can't. It's a system decision. We just can't do it. Okay, well, they probably can't do it. So you got two choices here. You can either keep beating your head against a brick wall and ruin the relationship, saying, now you got to go back. You got to talk because I want more. The salary, no. You're making it stressful and difficult and argumentative. Be creative. You say, was there some other way we could put something together, some extra money? Is there any type of bonus? Can I be assistant director of the endoscopy suite? Can I get a stipend for starting a heart failure program? Is there some quality bonus? Can we put together an equation here that gets me to the number I want? Signing and starting bonuses, very common. I see them in probably 95% of contracts. An average starting bonus is equal to about 1 month of your salary. That's average. So if your salary is $300,000, an average starting bonus would be about $25,000. That's going to depend on supply and demand. If they're really desperate, it'll be much higher. If they're not all that desperate, it's often lower than 1 month's salary, but that's like a median number. Most places will pay to move you to the new location if you have to relocate. If you have student loan debt, a lot of places will help pay on your student loans. Reasonable numbers here are many employers will pay between $10,000 and $20,000 a year on your student loans for perhaps 3 to 5 or 7 years. So my point here is that the salary might be a little low. But if they give you some type of bonus and they give you a nice signing bonus and they pay $20,000 a year on your student loans, well, maybe the total is actually a pretty good number. And remember, this money is all taxed the same. The IRS doesn't care what you call it. They take their cut of every nickel. So don't worry about what they call it. Just look for the total. And if you're happy, then you can sign the contract. A lot of employers will provide some tax-free money, some CME money, maybe pay for your board exam, your initial licenses. This isn't a lot of money, but if you're changing jobs and you're coming out of training, a small amount of money at a critical time is worth a lot. So don't overlook. A good negotiator looks for anything on the list. You turn over every stone and you see what's under it. And once in a while, you find something. That's money. If you join a private practice, most of us do so because we want to become owners and partners. Most corporations and most medical entities do require you to either be green card holder or citizen to buy into the practice. So sometimes that's a limitation. But in the long run, if you want to be a partner, it's important to ask, what's the timeline? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? If it's like 4 or 5 years, that's very problematic just because, practices get bought, then private equity comes along. You can't be waiting for partnership forever. The timeline has to be relatively short. Most people should make partner. If the last 5 people came through this practice and only 2 made partner, that's very problematic. There's something wrong with that practice, and it might be that they're taking advantage of young physicians. So look around and see who has made partner in the last few years and who hasn't. That speaks much louder than anything somebody puts in writing. once you offer me partner, I've been here 2 years, you've offered me partner, you say you can buy in. How much does it cost? What am I buying? What kind of a check do I have to write? And is it worth it? Now, there's no right and wrong answer here. But if you're going to put in 3 years of sweat at a lower salary than your buddy at the hospital's making, and then you're going to write a check for $150,000 to buy in, you're in pretty deep at this point. There better be a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, or financially, it just may not make sense. Again, no right and wrong answers here. But if you plan on being partner in a private group, you've got to figure out the answers to these questions before you sign any contract. Otherwise, you're being naively trusting, and that's not always the best strategy. Private equity buying practices is very challenging. So cardiology groups, gastroenterology groups, ophthalmology groups, a lot of the subspecialty groups being bought up by this. This is always something you should ask about if you're joining one of those subspecialties that's constantly being targeted by private equity. I think private equity, in the simple sentence, is a very bad thing for doctors and patients and medicine in general. There's a few times it can work, but in my opinion, it's always going to be one of your last choices. Fringe benefits like retirement and vacation, you don't usually have to negotiate these things. Most employers give all employees the same benefits. It's nice to know what they are, not typically negotiable. Maybe you do some outside activities, you like to moonlight. Maybe you have a telemedicine thing you do. Maybe you have a relationship with a drug company or a medical device company. Most employers allow this. Just make sure before you sign the contract that there's a process for you to continue doing those things. Immigration considerations. So this is also a term of arrival. Many folks who are on training visa, J1, you got two choices. You can either return to your home country for 2 years and then reapply to come back, or you can do a J1 waiver. You serve 3 years in an underserved area, and then that fulfills the home that waives. The reason they call it a waiver is it waives the requirement or forgives you of the requirement to return to your home country for 2 years. J1 waivers are available in every state. They're typically in underserved areas. So again, when you're applying for waivers, the number of potential jobs is going to be maybe 10 or 20% of the total number of jobs out there. It definitely restricts, it limits the pool of opportunities. And if you're trying to do like interventional GI and biliary stuff, so you got like some super subspecialty and you need a waiver and your spouse is a transplant cardiologist, you're going to have a hard time. I mean, you might find one job in the country that checks all those boxes. So it's a very challenging when you're highly subspecialized. There's a couple programs out there to get waivers. The Conrad 30 is the most common. Every state can give 30 waivers. It can be problematic. Last year in New York, they had 62 applications for 30 waivers. So that means half the people came up empty on the lottery. And then they don't have a waiver. They don't have a job, and now they're in panic mode. If you're a primary care physician, it's safer to go for an HHS waiver. They're limited to primary care, but as long as your employer does the paperwork, you're guaranteed to get the HHS waiver. There's no limit on the number. VA, you can do waivers for the VA. It's theoretically possible. I've never seen anybody do it, but it is possible. Regional commissions are the other option if you're in certain regions of the country, like the Mississippi Delta, the Appalachian region, or the Appalachian Mountains, southeastern United States. There's regional commissions that can give waivers, sort of like the HHS waiver, but they can give them to specialists. And there's no limit on the number. There's no lottery. So there's a number of ways when you talk to an employer and you're looking for a waiver, Make sure they have a good idea what type they're going to apply for. Make sure they've done it before. They know what they're doing and they've been successful. One of the most dangerous things to do is to bet on a waiver in a highly competitive place like New York for a Conrad 30 and do it with a practice that's never done it before. Your chances of coming up short are extremely high in that situation. Most employers, if they sponsor the waiver, they'll also sponsor the green card. Make sure you ask about that. The employer will also pay for all this. That should typically be in the contract. So if you're in this situation, you look for a waiver job where they also sponsor green card, you're going to have to commit to the area for at least 3 years. But again, that's part of the waiver requirement, and that's not negotiable. As terms of arrival, I'll wrap it up here and then I'll leave some questions. Terms of departure. So you say, I found a great job. I'm thrilled to death. I'm ready to sign. No, you're not. No, you're not. You got to know the terms of departure before you sign. There's 4 things you must know. The first one is notice. If you want to leave a job and end the contract, you must give the other person notice of termination. The typical contract would say, this contract could be terminated at any time by giving 90 days notice. Okay, you say, well, what if I want to leave? Give 90 days notice. You say, well, when can I do that? At any time. You say, but I've only been here a year. At any time. Okay, that's easy. That contract is not holding you at all. Now, if you're on a waiver, you got that to worry about because you got to fulfill the waiver. But the contract itself is not holding you there. You say, well, what do other contracts say? Some contracts will say, this can 90 days notice, 60 days notice, 180 days notice. That's not that big of a deal there. It's sort of a difference, but it doesn't make a big difference. Some contracts say this contract can be terminated by giving 90 days notice at any time after completion of the 3rd year. Well, that's slightly different, okay? And I had somebody a few months ago called me. They said I could terminate at any time by giving 90 days notice, right? I said, not quite. Okay. Read the rest of the sentence. At any time after completion of the 3rd year. He was in the 2nd year of his contract and he wanted out. And he thought he could get out by giving 90 days notice. And I said, that's not quite right. You're stuck for a little while longer. Make sure you know how much notice you have to give, but read the whole sentence because you might not be able to give it for at least a little while. That's becoming more and more common. As physicians are moving around, we're more migratory than we used to be. Over the past few years, employers have been making it more difficult to get out of contracts. And I think that's an unfortunate thing. That is a way to retain physicians, but it's not really the best. It's not the desirable way. Okay, so the desirable way, of course, is to treat us better, pay us better, listen to us. Unfortunately, some people are using the contract approach and just saying, well, you might not be happy, but you're not going anywhere. Non-compete clauses are legal. They're kind of on the run legally. They're being whittled away at. But they're still legal in 38 states. And these restrict your ability to stay in the community after you leave. Now, Maryland has a limit. If you make less than $350,000, they're illegal. In Washington, D.C., if you make less than $250,000, they're illegal. But most states, they're legal. In 12 states, they're completely illegal. So there's a number of caveats here, but these are valid. And if there's one in your contract and it says you can't practice within 10 miles of the MedStar location in Baltimore, if it says you can't practice in that circle and you try to practice in that circle, they absolutely will make trouble for you. There's an urban legend out there that employers don't worry about them much. That is not my experience. My experience is employers are very aggressive about them. And if there's one in your contract, make sure you know what it is before you sign it. Do your best to negotiate it, because after you leave, you will be stuck with it. And if you need to stay in Baltimore and you can't find a job because of the non-compete, you have a problem on your hands. You need to know that before you sign the contract. Tail coverage is a special type of malpractice insurance. It covers you for patients who sue after you leave. So you work in Baltimore for 3 years, you take a job in California, you give your 90 days notice, say goodbye to everybody. There's a non-compete, it's 10 miles, but you're going 2,000 miles, so it's irrelevant. And you go to California and you're super happy. Patients in Baltimore, they can still sue you for a couple years. You need malpractice insurance to cover that. It's commonly called tail coverage. Someone has to pay for it. Now, if you're a primary care doctor out in Western Maryland, it might be $15,000. If you're an interventional cardiologist in Philadelphia, it'll be over $100,000. That's a big nugget. You need to know who pays for that before you sign the contract. Because the other thing you might have to pay for is the signing bonus they gave you. So here's what happens to some people. They see a $100,000 signing bonus and they're thrilled to death and a big salary, and they just sign. And that might be okay, but they don't realize they can't get out of the contract for 2 or 3 years. They don't realize there's a big non-compete, so there's nowhere to go. And maybe their spouse has a career in the same town. They have to pay for the tail, which might be $75,000, and they have to give back a big chunk of that signing bonus. Now you're in a terrible dilemma. You can't leave. You got nowhere to go. And even if you could leave, you can't afford it. That is the absolute worst situation to be in. You're in a job you don't like. You're miserable every day, and you can't get out of the contract. The people that go through that, I talk to them 20 years later, and they still have a bad taste in their mouth about that job. That is something you want to, if you're going to sign a contract, you absolutely, and these terms are unfavorable, you absolutely want to know that to know what you're getting into, because you do not want to learn it after the job turns sour. Thanks for listening. I got a few minutes for questions, and I'll stick around as long as you'd like to ask.
Thank you for the wonderful words of wisdom, Dr. Cotton. And I feel we all feel very prepared for our contract negotiations after listening to this. I'll open the floor for questions, and I'll also be looking at the chat if anyone posts any questions. So feel free, everyone.
So I can start off, Dr. Cotton. So my question is specifically for in the DMV area, like you were mentioning that VA really does not do waiver jobs, though they are talked about as the J1 waiver place. So how do you know? How do you quickly kind of gauge, other than talking to lawyers and looking at websites? How do you go about doing this?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any special website where J1 waiver jobs are posted. So I'm unaware if it's out there. I think you have to start with, of course, jobs that are out there. Word of mouth is part of it. And the one thing I wouldn't hesitate to do, and I think physicians are always reluctant to do this, is I would just reach out to potential employers. If you're looking for a job and there's maybe 5 potential employers in the area, I would just reach out to the chairman of medicine or the director of the geriatrics program or whatever your specialty is. And I would just send them a polite email or letter, and just a paragraph or two, say, this is where I am, this is what I'm looking for, and see what they can do. I think as physicians, we're reluctant to do that because we're afraid of rejection. But you're not going to, if you're afraid of rejection, you're not going to get very far in life. I mean, people reject me all the time. As a lawyer, I'm used to it. So I think the process would be the traditional things, seeing what ads are out there, word of mouth, colleagues, people a year or two ahead of you that got a waiver somewhere can maybe give you the inside track on their institution. And the thing I think physicians are reluctant to do is just to reach out and contact people. And most of the time, you're not going to hear back, but that's okay. It doesn't mean they dislike you. frankly, I'd write to the person again in a couple months if you don't hear back. And you'd be surprised oftentimes how successful that can be.
Thank you so much for that.
I wanted to bring up an interesting point and a very important point that you mentioned, Dr. Cotton, about the terms of exit, which
Yes.
is particularly important for many of us who need a J1 waiver, which because we typically sign a 3-year contract as against a 1-year contract. I have also noticed people, due to if they're extremely unhappy with their jobs, transfer their waiver to another job. Now, is there anything in the contract that we should look for or request to add which may facilitate that?
Yes, this does come up. So one of the things that happens with the waiver is you have to serve the 3 years in a designated underserved area, but it does not have to be the same area. You could do 2 years here in Pennsylvania and 1 year in Ohio. The challenge is several fold there. You got a couple layers. The first layer is you have to petition USCIS for the transfer. And you have to show something called extenuating circumstances. In other words, there's something going on here that's so unfair that you got to let me transfer. The most common automatic way to get that approved is family separation. So your spouse matches in a fellowship in Ohio, you're doing a waiver in New Jersey, it's spousal family separation. It's an automatic approval for transfer. So that's the first one. Other reasons would be the employer is not paying, they're going bankrupt, they're going out of business, severe mistreatment, they're violating the contract. Those are a little harder to prove. Spousal separation. So if you're in a bad waiver job and you're trying to get out, the first thing to do is convince your spouse to match in Ohio, and that'll at least get you the USCIS approval. Once you get that, though, that's not enough. Now you have to find a job in Ohio that in an underserved area that'll accept and sponsor your waiver and your H-1B. Now, they have to be in an underserved area. You don't have to apply for a new waiver. You have the waiver, but they need to accept it. And a lot of institutions will do that because it's not that big of a deal. So that's step 2. The third step then is to circle back and terminate your existing contract. And this is where it's problematic because some states, and especially the HHS waiver, the Appalachian region waiver, the Delta regional waivers, they do not allow the contract to have a 90-day termination. It's not allowed. If you're on an HHS waiver, your contract cannot have a 90-day termination. So now you have a dilemma. You got the approval from USCIS. You have a job in Ohio that'll take you, but you can't terminate your contract. And in that situation, you typically have to, like if it's Appalachian region, you have to get their permission to terminate. Then you have to get the employer to agree to terminate. And that's very challenging, especially if they've been mistreating you and enjoying it. Now you have to go to them and say, I know you've been torturing me. We both know that. Would you be willing to let me out of the contract? Probably not. So theoretically, waivers can be transferred. I've had probably one person a year that I help with that process, but it's multifaceted and quite frankly, a little bit challenging to pull it off, although theoretically doable.
Thank you again. Any other questions from anyone else?
May I ask another question? So, Mr. Cotton, in view of the current situation and in view of, for example, Texas has said they're not going to offer any J-1B visas, does that mean that people who are looking for jobs in July shouldn't really target Texas at all?
Yeah, so I haven't kept up with the latest announcement by either the Fed or the individual states. So if the state of Texas is not going to do any Conrad 30, that would be their program. you would still have HHS waivers because those come through the federal government. That would be at a federal level, maybe a VA waiver to the extent they're out there. None of the regional commissions cover Texas. So if that's what they've decided and there's no Conrad 30s, then the only people who are going to get waivers in Texas would be primary care physicians through the HHS program. And that is a significant negative if you're a specialist.
Thank you.
Yeah, if if let's suppose the state of West Virginia decides they're not going to do any Conrad 30s, well, that's not that big of a deal because you still got HHS waivers for primary care, and the Appalachian Region Commission covers all of West Virginia, so they could give anybody a specialist primary care. They can give anybody a waiver. So depending on the state, you might have one or more other options, but in Texas, if you're a specialist, there would be no other options. There's supposed to be a Southwest Regional Commission, but it's authorized by Congress, but it was never established. So there's no secondary waiver there in the Southwest.
There's another question, I think, in the chat.
Yep. Franco Murillo, I believe he asked if any recommendations on signing for a job that is currently listed as proposed for withdrawal for HPSA designation.
Yeah, so this is challenging. I had this happen to somebody a year or so ago. They took a job in Western Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh, a ways, and they signed the contract, and then that lost its HPSA designation. So the waiver couldn't go through. And they had to scramble. The employer fortunately had other locations. They weren't as desirable, but at that point, he's late in the game. He had interviewed at other places, but had told them all no months ago. Had signed a contract, and then they had to scramble. Fortunately, was able to pull it off, but very stressful for him. I think you have to be, if you're going to sign a job like that, where there's a risk the waiver is going to be rejected, I would say have a backup plan. Does the employer have other locations that could qualify? Can they do an O1 visa to cover you for a year? Because I'll tell you, I've had a few people caught in situations like, not exactly like that, but I have had people who've had to leave the country because the J1 waiver fell through at the last minute. So if you're going to do that job, do it with a bigger employer that maybe has other sites that you could go to and still get a waiver. Or maybe they do an O1, make sure they can do that and are willing to do that. Otherwise, I think it's very risky.
But this wouldn't be a problem if the waiver is already approved and after the approval, the place loses the HPSA designation.
I don't know how that works. So I don't know how that works. I think once it's approved, clearly you've got the waiver. It'll list the locations. The waiver has to list the location. So it'll list two campuses. If they both lose their designation, I'm not sure how that plays out. So that's beyond that. I'm not an immigration expert, so I don't know the answer to that. I do know I had someone who was doing a waiver. She was in her second year, and the practice, they had 10 clinics. They closed the clinic location, and none of their other locations qualified. And that contract had to be terminated. So they didn't allow her to transfer that waiver to a non-HPSA location. So I don't know what happens if your site that's approved loses its designation. I don't know if that matters or not.
I have one last question. Sorry, Dr. Cotton. So I remember you saying early on that, we need to specifically mention things like, if you want research, make sure you want that. And just for people who are going to be potential hospitalists, I assume that also means a number of nights you're going to do,
Yeah,
because that's a very important part of it. Just wanted to bring it up. Yeah.
absolutely. So if you're a hospitalist and they said you will not have to work more than 2 weeks of nights per year, and that matters to you as it does to most of us, that's absolutely something you need a limit on. Because what happens is they'll say, well, we have a good supply of hospitalists, so you never have to do more than 10 nights a year. Yeah, that's true today. But what about next year when you're in your first year of your waiver? You can't leave for 2 more years and they lose their hospitalists. Well, I'll tell you who's going to be working nights. It's probably you. And then you say, well, then I'll quit. Well, you can't. So that, again, that is one of those situations where going in, you need some security there in that contract, because otherwise that could turn sour very quickly.
May I ask you a question, Dr. Cotton?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. This was remarkable. I'm so impressed by your use of language. I regret you not negotiating my past contract. I should have never signed before I met you. I need a time machine now. But what I've realized is I did a pretty poor job. I did all the things you said to avoid, but next one I'll be sharper. My question is, in regard to using a professional, someone like yourself or another, licensed professional for help
Yeah.
with this, I feel more comfortable with, presenting a contract, some paperwork aspect to a lawyer or someone like that to say, hey, is this up to par? They seem mostly boilerplate templates, so I don't know that there's too much askew in them. But I think the idea of using professional legal help in the negotiation process actively would be more beneficial to someone in my position, or maybe for some of us, but feels a little more uncomfortable how to bring that up in the discussion with your employer,
Yeah.
potential employer. Hey, I was great to talk to you. I love the job, but I want my friend Dr. Cotton to come in here and really give you, a good punch. How
Yeah.
how would you suggest a physician go about that interplay?
uh, Common scenarios. So your first observation is correct. Most of these contracts, 99% of the contract is perfectly fine. It doesn't need to be touched. It's at these subtle margins where we're talking about how many nights you might have to work, how many times you have to go to that bad clinic, how much research time. You know that if you just do a fantastic job negotiating, we might only have to change 25 words in the whole contract, because we're just tweaking some of the subtle words here to get you that research time, limit those nights, get you that bonus. It's not much. So employers will commonly say, you can have your lawyer look at the contract, but it's all compliant. Yeah, I know it is. I mean, there's nothing illegal in there. It's just we want to just tweak it a little bit. Now, your second question was, how do I do that? I have found that most employers do not want to talk to a lawyer. They don't want to talk to your lawyer. They don't want to talk to me. Why? How many physicians do want to talk to lawyers? Okay, none. Okay, no physician. How many people want to talk to a lawyer? None. Okay, so I think you're much more successful if, in our hypothetical, you and I look at the contract, go through it, talk about the terms of arrival, the terms of departure, what matters to you, what you want to try to improve. And then I would help you figure out how do we present this in a way that's going to be well received. And that typically means you and I come up with the plan and then you execute the plan. Fortunately, most negotiation starts these days with an email. So you and I would develop an email outlining your 4 or 5 things that matter the most. We'd make it collegial, friendly, encouraging, all the principles I talked about. We wouldn't give any ranges. We give numbers. We'd also, a good negotiator, if you got 5 things, you start with the easiest thing, not the hardest thing. So you start with something easy about, hey, we talked about my clinic. Can we add that? Yeah, we talked about it. That's fine. That's easy. It's not in the contract, but it's easy to add it because we agreed to it. And then you work your way to the harder item, like financial requests, research requests. The reason you do it that way is if I got 5 things on email and I get through the first 3 when I'm reading it and it's going good, then we've only got we're almost done. Like we're almost there. If you start with the hardest item, like, you got to pay me more money, and then there's 4 or 5 other things, I'm like, psychologically, a good negotiator starts from agreement. These are easy things. I would help you draft that. You would send it. Most of the time they write back. Sometimes they want to talk to you. That's fine. If they want to have a conversation, you already have an outline for the conversation. You've already put your issues on the table. It's just a matter of resolving them. Much more effective than saying, go talk to the chair and here's 5 things. You're going to get to number 1 or 2, and then you're going to chicken out, and you probably won't even bring up the other 3. So I like to start with email. It gives us a record. We can track it, know what we agreed to. And ultimately then, once we boil it down, then we can change the contract, sign it, and we're done. That's the approach I find most effective, because you're exactly right. Even though I used to be a physician, I'm a lawyer. Nobody wants to talk to me. And I think in most times, you're correct. It sort of does hurt the relationship when you do that.
Hey, that was such a helpful explanation. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Dr. Sood. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been
Dr.
terrific.
White?
Yeah, this has been terrific. I know it's helped many people. We had quite a few people on from across the country. So you've really made a big difference here.
Thank